They called it a strategic realignment. The founder's nephew said it without blinking, his face a small rectangle on my laptop screen at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning. His camera was on, which I'll give him credit for. More than I expected from a 1-year-old who'd been at the company for 4 months and already had a corner office on the executive floor. My name is Webb. I'm 54 years old. And the man who just told me my role was being eliminated had once asked me to explain what supply chain software actually did. I'm not exaggerating that. 6 weeks after he arrived, he pulled me into a conference room and asked me, sincerely, if our platform could integrate with a fitness tracking app to help. I sat there for a moment, genuinely uncertain if he was testing me or if the question was real. It was real. I told him that Nextflow was a logistics routing and optimization engine used by federal contractors and mid-sized distribution networks, not a wellness tool. He looked at his phone while I was talking. Now he was telling me my position had been restructured. There was an HR representative on the call too, side-by-side rectangles on the screen. She had a practiced tone, the kind you develop after delivering bad news enough times that it stops feeling like bad news. She said the company appreciated my 17 years of contributions. She said the transition team would be in touch about severance. She said I could take the rest of the day. I said thank you and closed the laptop. My desk was in the corner of the open floor plan, same spot I'd sat in since the second year I was there, back when the office had 30 employees and we celebrated every new contract with cheap wine in paper cups. I packed my personal items into a canvas bag I found under the desk. A photo of my son at his college graduation. A small wooden carving my mother made that said measure twice on one side and cut once on the other. A spare charger I'd been meaning to take home for 2 years. Nobody said anything as I walked out. Either they didn't know yet or they didn't know what to say. I didn't stop to find out. The drive home took 22 minutes. I know that because I checked the clock when I left the parking lot and checked it again when I pulled into my driveway, the way you do when your brain is running on automatic and the rest of you is somewhere far away. My house was quiet. My son was in Denver. My ex-wife and I had been on good terms for years, the kind that come after the anger burns itself out, but there was nobody to call. Not yet. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. Here's the thing about being fired after 17 years. The anger doesn't come all at once. It arrives in layers. First, there's the disbelief, that specific kind of quiet that settles in when reality hasn't fully registered yet. Then there's the inventory every late night, every weekend call, every time you chose the job over something else because you believed it mattered. Then, eventually, if you're lucky or if you've done certain things correctly, there's something else entirely. I was starting to feel that third thing. 12 years ago, I was sitting in my mother's kitchen in Decatur, Georgia. She'd been gone for 3 months by then, but I still went back there sometimes. The house smelled like her cedar and the particular soap she'd used her whole life. She was a contract attorney for 31 years. She specialized in intellectual property licensing, and she was better at it than most people, twice her reputation. A month before she died, she called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was working on Nextflow, not for Hartwell, they hadn't made me a full-time offer yet. I was a senior consultant at the time, technically independent, and I'd been building the core routing architecture on my own equipment during nights and weekends because I believed in what it could do. The optimization logic, the core distribution algorithm, the base protocol that everything else would eventually run on, that was mine. Built before any employment contract, before any IP agreement, before any of the legal paperwork that companies generate to make sure they own what their employees create. My mother knew what I was building. She asked about it every time we talked. Marcus, she said that Sunday, when that company makes you a formal offer, you need to do something first. Before you sign anything, you need to set up a separate entity and file the core work under your own name. I told her the company seemed legitimate, that the founder was a good man, that I trusted the people I'd been working with. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I've spent 30 years watching good people, trust good people, and still lose what they built. Trust doesn't live in the contract. The contract is what survives when trust runs out. She walked me through exactly what to do, how to structure the LLC, how to file a provisional patent on the architecture, how to draft a licensing agreement that looked standard on the surface but contained protections. She said most corporate legal teams would skim past if the main terms looked reasonable. Put in a clause about rebranding, she said. No white labeling, no renaming, no repackaging of the system without written approval from the original developer. Companies love to rebrand things they didn't build. It's how they erase the person who built it. She died 6 weeks later. A blood clot nobody saw coming. She was 71 and sharp and gone before I'd finished processing the last conversation we'd had. I sat in her kitchen for 3 days after the funeral, going through her files. She had 30 years of case notes, organized in green hanging folders, label maker tabs, every contract she'd ever drafted, cross-referenced with the relevant statutes. I found a folder with my name on it. Inside was a handwritten checklist of every step she'd told me to take, with sources, with sample language, with a note at the bottom in her handwriting, "Don't skip the rebranding clause. That's the one they never see coming." I did everything on that list. Webb Digital Solutions LLC, registered in Georgia. Nextflow Core Routing System, version 1. Original architecture and optimization protocols. Owner and developer, Marcus Webb. Filed 6 weeks before I signed Hartwell's full-time employment agreement, before any IP assignment clause, before any of the standard language their legal team used to claim ownership of everything created during employment. I licensed Nextflow to Hartwell under terms that looked, at first glance, like a typical developer licensing arrangement. Hartwell's attorneys reviewed it, saw my signature, filed it under contractor IP transitions, and moved on. They never checked the filing dates. They assumed the employment contract superseded everything. They assumed what most companies assume, that the work belongs to them because they're paying for it now, regardless of when it was actually created. But my mother had been very specific about what I buried in Section 7. Clause 7.4. No rebranding, white labeling, or renaming of the Nextflow system or any derivative architecture. Clause 7. 1. No sublicensing or transfer of core system rights to third parties without written consent from the original developer of record. 17 years later, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a canvas bag of desk items, I thought about the founder's nephew, about the presentation he gave at the National Supply Chain Summit in Atlanta 8 weeks ago. I watched the live stream from my desk because he hadn't invited anyone from the core engineering team. He stood at a podium and told 3,000 people in the room and several thousand more watching online that Hartwell was proud to announce the next generation of their logistics platform. He clicked to a slide with a new logo, a new color palette, a new name, Flow Edge, he called it. He talked about AI-driven routing, about predictive distribution modeling, about how Hartwell had built something transformative from the ground up. Every single feature he described ran on Nextflow. He hadn't asked me. He hadn't asked anyone in engineering. He'd gone to a graphic design firm, gotten a new brand identity, hired a PR agency to write the press release, and announced to the industry that the product I built was now called something else. I remember watching it and feeling something I couldn't quite name at the time. Not anger, exactly. More like recognition. The way you feel when something you've been waiting for finally arrives, even if you didn't know you were waiting. 3 days after I was fired, an email landed in my inbox at 8:51 inches the morning. I was still in sweatpants, still recalibrating what my days looked like without a calendar full of stand-ups and deployment reviews. The sender was Victor Cho, Chief Strategy Officer at Meridian Logistics Group. Meridian was Hartwell's most significant competitor. We'd spent years building around their moves, studying their patents, pricing our federal contracts in direct response to theirs. In the industry, when people talked about the two companies in the same sentence, they were usually talking about a contract one of us had just won or the other had just lost. Victor Cho's email was 6 sentences long. Mr. Webb, we've been tracking Nextflow patent filings as part of our competitive intelligence for several years. We recently identified that Webb Digital Solutions, LLC, not Hartwell Systems, holds the original developer rights to the core architecture. We believe the original developer should control where their work goes next. If our understanding of the ownership structure is correct, we'd like to have a conversation. This can be handled with complete discretion. Victor Cho. I read it twice. Then I stood up and walked to the window. My backyard is not remarkable. A fence, a maple tree that drops leaves from October through December, a grill I keep meaning to replace. My ex-wife used to say, I could make any view meditative if I stared at it long enough. She wasn't wrong. I went back to my laptop and typed 4 words. How certain are you? His response came 40 minutes later. Certain enough to fly you out. I typed back, in person only, your office. He replied, Wednesday, I'll send details. That weekend, I pulled out the original files. I hadn't looked at them in years. The provisional patent filing, printed and stored in the same green hanging folder my mother had prepared. The LLC registration, the licensing agreement from 2009, the version Hartwell's attorneys had reviewed and filed away without examining the dates on the attached exhibits. I went through every page, every clause, every date stamp. The foundation was exactly what I'd built it to be, version 1.0 of Nextflow's core routing architecture was filed under Webb Digital Solutions, LLC, 12 weeks before my Hartwell employment start date. The licensing agreement granted Hartwell usage rights, not ownership, not transfer, not the ability to rebrand or sublicense without written approval from the original developer. The founder's nephew had announced FlowEdge at a nationally broadcast industry conference. Press release, keynote slide deck, new website, product landing page that didn't mention Nextflow or the 17 years of engineering that made it work. He'd violated Clause 7.4, publicly. On a live stream I still had saved in my browser history. Wednesday morning I flew to Seattle. Meridian's office was in a converted warehouse in the Sodu district, exposed brick and functioning infrastructure. The kind of building that said, "We build things here instead of we talk about building things here." Victor Cho met me in the lobby, early 50s, the kind of handshake that doesn't try too hard. He'd been in logistics technology for 28 years. He looked like it, in the good way. He took me to a conference room on the second floor and opened a folder on the table. Inside was a complete breakdown, my LLC registration, the original provisional patent filing, a timeline showing version 1 was submitted 12 weeks before my Hartwell employment contract. Clause 7.4 highlighted, a printout of the FlowEdge announcement from the summit with the date circled in red. "The rebranding announcement triggered your clause," he said. "Every licensing agreement tied to the Nextflow architecture is now on uncertain legal ground. Federal contractors require verified IP ownership for compliance. When the audits start, Hartwell won't be able to certify chain of title." I looked at the documents. Everything was exactly where I'd put it 12 years ago, in a green hanging folder with a label maker tab, following a checklist my mother wrote by hand. Victor slid another document across the table. Exclusive licensing agreement, 10 years, $620 million. The title on the second page read, Marcus Webb, original developer and chief architect, Nextflow core system, a full team, a lab, approval rights on any derivative work. A title that said what I actually was, not what a corporate hierarchy decided I was worth calling. "We don't do bloodlines here," Victor said. "We do architecture." I read every page, every clause. My mother's voice in the back of my head on every paragraph. Read it twice. Trust nothing you don't verify. The terms were clean, more than clean. They were written by people who understood what they were acquiring. I looked up at Victor. He wasn't selling anything, just waiting. "What happens to Hartwell?" I asked. "Their current federal contracts require them to certify IP ownership in the next compliance cycle," he said. "When their legal team traces the chain of title, they'll find what we found. Their clients will have grounds to challenge the contracts. That process will move on its own. You won't need to do anything." I thought about the founder. He'd been a decent man when I started, the kind of CEO who knew his engineers by name and asked about their families. The company had grown past the point where that was possible to sustain, and somewhere in that growth his nephew had appeared with an MBA and a mandate to modernize the roadmap. The founder had handed him the keys to things he didn't understand, and called it succession planning. I thought about my colleague Danny Reeves, 31 years old, best systems integration engineer I'd ever trained, worked on Nextflow deployments for 4 years, and knew the architecture better than anyone left at Hartwell, except me. He'd been in that summit audience watching the FlowEdge announcement with the same expression I'd had watching the live stream. He knew exactly what he was seeing. I thought about the other engineers who had nothing to do with the decisions being made on the executive floor, people who showed up and did the work and would pay the price for someone else's carelessness. I signed the contract. "We're announcing Friday," Victor said. "Your name on the press release as original developer and chief architect. If there are people you want to bring with you, put together a list." I had one name ready before I left the building. I flew home that afternoon, made dinner, called my son in Denver, and talked for an hour about nothing in particular. Didn't mention any of it. Just wanted to hear his voice. Thursday morning, Danny texted me. "Marcus, legal just sent a company-wide memo. Full audit of all FlowEdge licensing documentation. Mandatory. Effective immediately. Do you know what's happening?" I typed back, "Check the news Friday morning." He sent a question mark. I didn't respond. Friday, Meridian's press release went live at 9 in the morning. Meridian Logistics Group partners with Marcus Webb, original developer of Nextflow core architecture, in landmark $620 million exclusive agreement. The subheading read, Webb Digital Solutions LLC retains original patent rights. Webb named chief architect at Meridian Logistics Group. Tech blogs had it by 10. Supply chain industry newsletters by 11. LinkedIn was moving by noon. ABS. My phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, former colleagues, clients I'd worked with on federal deployments, 2 people from my MBA program in the 90s, all of them asking some version of the same question. Did Hartwell actually not own Nextflow? I answered a few of them, kept it brief. Danny texted again at 12:15. The FlowEdge website just went dark, like completely gone, the entire page, just a 404. I smiled. Sounds like someone finally read the licensing agreement, I wrote back. Saturday morning, I was making breakfast when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to it while the eggs were cooking. It was a board member I'd met twice at company events. Older man, careful voice. He said he was calling personally, not on behalf of the company, just to say he was sorry about how things had happened, that the decision to terminate my role had been made without adequate due diligence, that he wished he'd asked more questions at the time. I appreciated the call. I didn't call back. Monday morning, 3 things happened before noon. The first was a lawsuit, filed at 9 a.m. by a federal logistics contractor who had signed a $38 million FlowEdge deployment agreement 2 months ago. The complaint alleged misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership in the contract execution. They wanted out, and they wanted their deposits back. The second was a story in the Wall Street Journal. The headline was something I'd already seen 3 variations of across different outlets. Hartwell Systems built on licensed foundation it didn't own. The story was accurate. The quotes from industry analysts were measured. The response from Hartwell's PR team was a single paragraph that said the company was reviewing its intellectual documentation. The third was a text from Danny. Emergency all hands. Just ended. The founder stood up in front of the whole company and said the FlowEdge rebrand was being rolled back effective immediately. He looked exhausted. The nephew wasn't in the room. I put my phone down and finished my breakfast. Tuesday, a second lawsuit. This one from a Series C investor group. Material misrepresentation of asset ownership in investment disclosures. Wednesday, a third, from a government agency that had been in contract negotiations for a Nextflow-based infrastructure project. They'd paused all discussions pending IP verification. Hartwell's stock had been privately held, which limited the visibility. But the company valuation that had been cited in their last funding round was $480 million. By Wednesday afternoon, based on the settlements being floated and the contracts being challenged, independent analysts were estimating actual enterprise value closer to $190 million. Clients were leaving or renegotiating. 3 of their largest federal prospects had quietly reached out to Meridian. Danny texted me Wednesday evening with a screenshot, an internal memo from Hartwell's general counsel to the executive team. Subject line in red. Nextflow IP ownership urgent legal review, all licensing activities suspended pending audit. Thursday morning, the announcement came. The founder was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. The press release said he was transitioning to a board advisory role to focus on long-term strategic vision. Standard exit language, every word meaning something different from what it said. Danny sent me the leaked internal letter an hour later. The board had called a confidence vote, 7-1. The resolution cited failure to maintain IP governance standards and insufficient oversight of executive decision-making that resulted in material breach of third-party licensing agreements. They'd forced him out, a man who'd built a company from a 2-person consulting practice, gone in less than 2 weeks because he handed the keys to someone who couldn't read the room, let alone the contracts. I sat with that for a while. There's a version of that story where I felt something uncomplicated satisfaction, maybe, or the clean feeling of justice landing where it was supposed to, but it wasn't uncomplicated. The founder wasn't a bad person. He was a person who made a bad decision and never corrected it, and the cost of that was his company and his position, and probably a significant part of what he'd spent 30 years building. His nephew had posted on LinkedIn the day before, a carefully worded statement about transitioning to a focus on advisory and thought leadership work. He described his time at Hartwell as a transformative experience that taught him the importance of due diligence and collaborative leadership. The comments were not kind. He turned them off after about 4 hours. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A woman introduced herself as interim general counsel for Hartwell. Professional voice, She said the company wanted to discuss a potential licensing arrangement that would allow continued operation under the Nextflow architecture while a transition plan was developed. She said they were prepared to make a substantial offer. Send it in writing, I said. My attorney will review it. She started to say something else. I thanked her and ended the call. The email arrived 90 minutes later. I opened it, read the first paragraph, closed it, forwarded it to the IP attorney I'd retained the week before with a single note. For your records. No action required. Then I deleted it from my inbox. 2 days later, I drove back to my mother's house in Decatur. I'd been meaning to go for months. The current owners had kept the exterior paint the same color, a particular shade of green my mother had chosen in 1989 and never changed. I parked across the street and sat there for a few minutes, not going in, just looking at it. She'd been right about everything. Every clause, every date, every step on that handwritten checklist in the green hanging folder. She'd spent 30 years watching people lose what they built because they trusted the wrong agreements, and she'd made sure I didn't. I thought about what she'd said on that Sunday phone call, the last real conversation we had about the work. Trust doesn't live in the contract. The contract is what survives when trust runs out. I drove back home and called my son, told him the whole story this time. He listened without interrupting, which he's always been better at than I deserve. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Grandma knew, he said. Yeah, I said. She did. The following month, I gave a talk at the American Logistics Technology Conference in Chicago. 4,000 attendees. The moderator introduced me as original developer of the Nextflow system, not former Hartwell engineer, not consultant, developer. The panel was about IP protection in software architecture. Good questions from the moderator, thoughtful ones from the audience. I talked about building systems that outlast the companies that use them, about the difference between licensing your work and surrendering it, about reading the fine print of every agreement before you sign it, including and especially the ones that seem standard. After the panel, there was a line. Engineers, mostly, a few founders, a couple of people from federal procurement who'd been quietly watching the Hartwell situation and wanted to understand what the IP audit process looked like in practice. Near the end of the line, a young woman stepped forward. Mid-20s, developer badge from a startup I didn't recognize. She had a notebook, actual paper, and she'd been writing throughout the panel. Mr. Webb, she said, can I ask you something? Go ahead. What made you listen to your mother? Like, you clearly trusted the company. You stayed for 17 years. What made you actually do the thing she told you to do, instead of just filing it away? I thought about that Sunday afternoon, about sitting in her kitchen after the funeral, working through the checklist she'd left. About the wooden carving on my desk measured twice, cut once that she'd made for me when I got my first job out of college, a joke about carpentry that turned out to be about everything else. She didn't ask me to distrust the company, I told her. She asked me to protect the work. Those are different things. Your employer can restructure your role. Your title can disappear. They can put someone else's name on a press release, but the original filing date on a provisional patent, that's yours. No one can change that date. She was writing. And your mother, she started. She was the best contract attorney I ever knew, I said, and she was my mother. When she told me something mattered, I believed her. The woman nodded slowly, closed her notebook. Thank you. I watched her walk back into the crowd and hoped she'd remember that conversation in 10 years, sitting in her own kitchen, trying to decide whether to take the step that seemed overly cautious at the time. Walking out of the convention center that evening, Chicago whined off the lake cold enough to feel like an opinion. My phone buzzed. Email notification. Subject. Settlement discussion final offer privileged and confidential. Hartwell's legal team. Fourth one they'd sent in 3 weeks. I didn't open it. I'd learned everything I needed to from the first one. 6 months after I signed the contract, Meridian announced a $740 million federal infrastructure deployment. Largest logistics security network in Department of Transportation history. Nextflow at the core. My architecture, my optimization protocols, my name on the technical specifications as original developer. The press release was 2 pages. My name appeared in the first paragraph. Danny texted me that afternoon. Just saw the announcement. That's your work out there, man. 17 years of it. Our work, I wrote back. How are things? Honestly, quiet. They're doing maintenance contracts. Nothing new. I've been looking around. Send me your resume, I typed. He sent it 11 minutes later. I forwarded it to Victor with one line. Best deployment engineer I ever trained. He also knows when to document important conversations. Victor replied, "Bring him in." That evening I sat on my back porch with a beer. The maple tree was just starting to drop leaves, the early ones that go first, yellow before the rest of the tree catches up. My son had called earlier. My ex-wife had texted about a thing at my grandson's school she thought I'd want to know about. Nothing dramatic, just the texture of a life that was still here, still good, still mine. I thought about something my mother used to say at the end of phone calls. "You built it. That means something. Don't let anyone file that away." They fired the employee. The employee's name is on a severance agreement in a filing cabinet somewhere in a building I'll never set foot in again. But the developer's signature is on the original patent, dated 12 years before any of this happened, in the handwriting of a man who listened when it mattered. And now everyone knows it.